And I call the meeting to order. Roll call, please, Sherry.
Chair Akins, Vice Chair Quinn absent. Commissioners McCready,
Present.
James,
Present.
Condrey,
Yes.
McCatton,
Yes.
DePoit.
Here.
Pledge of Allegiance, everyone. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Now we have public comments. Members of the public wishing to address the Historic Preservation Commission on items appearing on the agenda are requested to complete a speaker's card and file it with the secretary. Cards are available in the council chambers lobby. All comments should be limited to 3 minutes unless additional time is granted by the chair. Speakers should state their name and address for the record and must direct their comments to the chair, not the audience or press. While the Historic Preservation Commission is in session, members of the commission, city staff, and members of the audience are expected to maintain order and decorum and to obey the orders of the chair. Do we have any public comments?
My public comment is that I never reads that.
I thought you guys always read that. He reads. Well, we're old-fashioned. Anyway, we read it. Okay, no public comments. And museum representative Mark Lewis does not seem to be available. So we will move down to consent item minutes. Oh,
Maybe we could just do some quick announcements because there's on Saturday at 11 o'clock, there's going to be the dedication of the gate that turned out to be a joint project between the museum and the Arts Commission. And then I guess this body had their say on the gates too. So that's going to be an exciting ribbon cutting on Saturday at 11 a.m. I don't have any other
thanks.
news.
Anyone have any announcements? No announcements. So we'll move on to the minutes of November 8th. If anyone has any corrections? I wasn't here, so I don't have any. I don't think.
The only question I have is, it says that there's a thank you note that should be sent out to Mr. Bauer, and I don't know who was going to do that. Do you know? Does anybody remember? Was it Brian that said we?
Why don't we put that until Brian comes in and see if he
Okay.
did that? But
That's
if,
the only thing
yeah.
about the minutes, that it just doesn't say who was going to do it, so I just want to
Okay.
make sure it gets done.
Yeah, let's
Besides
ask
that,
Brian.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Minutes are approved. Next is the reception for the Smith Hobson House, item number 1. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Wait.
I could speak to that if you want me to. My original idea, of course, was to have had it in a timely fashion sometime this fall, but now that that's not going to be happening, I am thinking that it might be better to postpone it till April or May. I still think it'd be a nice thing to do for the family and the city and everybody to have something like that, but I think the grounds would look nicer then, and things would be growing and could be nice and cleaned up, and we could have a nice tour. And I have this article from May 2019, 27, talking about an event that the Hobsons had here, and it invited all their employees and all the people that worked on building the house, and that was in May.
What date was that? May what year?
1927,
Oh.
when they finished this
Right.
project, and they entertained a lot. And I don't know if you want to see that, but here's a photo. You know that in the back there's the arbor, and they actually had picnic tables back there and had a lot of events. And there's a little structure that has a cement floor, and they used to use that as a dance hall. So they entertained an awful lot. And
Is this from the museum?
this actual photograph, so we could use it as an invitation.
I got that actually from the Ventura County
Oh.
Museum.
They have a better copy than
Yeah,
the,
that's
'cause
a
it would make a
Xerox.
wonderful invitation.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, fold it, make a wonderful
And
invitation.
so that's what I'm thinking right now, and I don't know, that would give everybody much more time to plan it, and
Mhm.
how does that sound?
Um,
I don't know how to pick the date.
My
but-
first thought, whenever I have a party that honors someone, I ask the honoree what date works for them.
Yeah.
Because there's no point in planning a party and the Smith Hobsons are gonna
Right.
say we're in Hawaii.
Yeah, so we'd have, but it's hard for somebody to plan all out in April or May.
Well, I think a
but
rough,
Maybe next year I could call Greg Smith and
Yeah.
find out, tell him.
To me, that's the very first thing, is to ask them approximate 2 or 3 dates that are available,
Okay,
and then to decide how many guests there will be, because that determines the budget. Then we get into this list that appeared here, the commission, the budget, et cetera. Because until you have the date and how many people, you can't know how much it will be.
that's true.
So maybe put this off till after you've talked to them?
Hmm?
Maybe put all these other questions off?
Yeah, we could put the questions off then, I would think, till next year.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I could try to look into too is the budget question that I see you have down here.
Until we
'cause-
know how many guests, we won't have a budget.
Right, and I know there was no, line item in this fiscal year budget for an event like this, but you do have money for other things. So could some of that money be used towards this? I could try to determine that,
Mhm.
and then obviously determine what you think the budget would be.
Mhm.
So it'd give
I
us some
just
time to
don't-
work that
I don't
out.
see how it would be very costly to have some beverages and some
No,
snacks.
I don't know either, but that's what I didn't know what all was involved. So if
Yeah.
it's the less expensive, obviously, the easier.
Yeah.
Elise, do you want to ask them after the new year for maybe 3 dates that would work for the family, and then we can dial it in after that?
Yeah, so at what point do we have to ask the council to?
Do we? I don't think we need to.
Well, I want I want the city involved, though. I mean,
Yeah.
the
But for
council
permission.
members and,
I mean, if you're looking at putting it out a few months, I don't know, you'd want to do it, say, maybe by February or March. I'm thinking if we're talking April, May, and
yeah.
that also helps too, I think, if you're trying to get awareness
Get over there.
for the event, is to discuss it with the council as well.
Right, so February, a February council meeting then.
Sure, yeah, that would be a good time, I would think, yeah, as if you're looking at a couple months ahead of the actual event.
Yeah, so how does that get on the council agenda then?
I think we could just put it on the council agenda, noting that it came out of here. I think once you've got some certainty about the date, that we can then report out that there will be this event at this date.
Okay.
I'd like to ask you, Souza, on our agenda, it says, assign a commissioner to present the idea to council for review and approval. I have never seen an issue where a commission like this to honor a historian would need an approval from the council. That seems to make it into a much more timely thing. Yeah, I think maybe as a courtesy discussion and say we're going to have this, event, but
Well, this is,
yeah, just because you're here, I thought it would be nice to hear your
but
thoughts.
this is something that the city is celebrating the landmarking of this
Mhm.
building,
Yeah,
not just us commissioners though. So I think
No,
the
I-
city needs to,
but
Council.
approve it makes it
well, I
harder.
don't know.
I-
I don't know, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the more important issue of getting it at a
Inclusion
bigger
is
venue
one
like
thing,
a council
yeah.
meeting, but it's not a formal approval action.
That's what I was,
Yeah.
that word is always
I think it's
fraught
more of
with
an
danger.
informational, this event will be occurring on this date.
Right.
Okay, so Brian, what we're talking about is postponing this event till the spring, like April or May, but I'll contact Greg Smith and try at the new year and try to get a date, likely date some dates from them.
Okay, just so you know, coming up in one of the Saturday nights in April, the as one of the fundraisers the museum does, when they go around and visit the historic homes, and also now they've added homes with artwork. It's one of the fundraisers. Typically, that starts off at the museum. They go off to the homes, and then they come back to some key spot. That key spot is going to be the Smith Hobson House this year.
Oh,
That's Feasting on History?
Yes, yeah.
huh.
So we've already got the green light from Mr. McCleary back there. Bill Wyrick and his wife have agreed to be the hosts for that. And so but they won't get here, the people won't get here until about 8 o'clock that night,
I
so.
wonder if we could have an early afternoon thing on the same day, or that's too much?
Well, yeah, so the museum thing, again, I think we start at like 5 o'clock at the museum, then we go to the homes about 6 o'clock. Then we try to get people to leave. Usually everybody's having a good time and hard to get them out. And then they come here about 8 o'clock and we finish about 9 o'clock. So, and I've been wondering the same thing. Is there a way we could work both of those in?
So I was thinking
But
of
I don't
an
know.
afternoon event
Why
rather
would you
than
want to have them both
evening.
on the same day?
Well, I wouldn't. I've been trying to figure out if we could in some way, but again, because the joint reception won't be here until about 8 o'clock that night. I didn't think that would work.
And it
but-
all depends upon when the Smith family, it's a
True,
good date for them
True.
too.
So that's, all I'm saying is that there's already one event that's scheduled for here, not related to celebrating this as a historic home or recognizing the Smith family, just happens to be taking place. And again, it's coming here because we try to culminate in a historic location. We've done it at the Oaks. The Oaks hosted us 2 years ago. Last year we were out at Crotona. They hosted us. It was wonderful, by the way. And so this year, again, Bill and his wife have agreed to be our host, and Steve has agreed to allow us to be here.
Wow, great.
So again, that's just coincidental
Mhm.
to everything else that was going on.
So what do we just table this till next year?
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea to then focus on the date, to get that locked in, to pick this up as a discussion item January, February.
Okay, so Sherry, do you want to add this to our agenda for January to continue? And maybe Elise, by the time we have our meeting in January, you might have time to have a call with the Smith Hobsons, just for
Okay.
a couple dates. So I think we can move to discussion item number 3. And this is adding Matilaha Junior High School to the top of the priority list.
I'd like to make a slight clarification to this discussion.
Can we get the staff report first?
Oh, oh, okay, okay. Okay. Where am I?
Commissioner Conver, you want to turn over to the director to present the staff report?
All right, I didn't hear you.
Well, there's,
Over to the director to present the staff report.
Sure.
well, it's going to be very brief. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but I think it's, considering putting the Matilaha Junior High School on the priority list with the other 3 sites that are listed in the staff report, the Boyd Center, the library, and looking at the establishment of the downtown historic district. Again, this is a discussion item to see if that would be added to the list and where on that list it would be prioritized. So,
Like to speak to that, if I could?
I'd just like to make a clarification first, if I may, that my intention of moving this up on the list was to prepare a historic resource report only, not to try to take it further at this point, but just for everyone to know what we have, what resources we have there, the town has, or the school district. And so we're clear about all the buildings and their history. And I'm not proposing to landmark the junior high. That's not my intention, so I just wanted to be clear on that.
Okay, can I speak to that? So they operate as a school, so they don't have to follow a lot of the regulations, not like it was with the school district that wasn't an operating school. So as much as I I'm curious to know what we have there and what the history is, taking the funds away from the other ones that we want to get done for something that we're not going to landmark seems like, I don't know, just not a good use of our resources, even though I'm curious as well. But I think the downtown historic core is going to cost a lot of funds, and I think it's timely that we need to get moving on that. I don't know if we could, I don't know how it works as far as the budget. If, like last year we did one, the year before that I don't think we had any.
Actually, we had several the year before that. We were doing both the Nordhoff Grammar School and this building here.
So if is it a certain number that we have, a certain budget that we have each year to do it?
It's a budget number.
And does the budget go over from year to year, or is it, if we don't use it, we lose it?
We make a request every year.
Right. So each year you essentially start over. You've got a fiscal year budget. So this year is $15,000. And I think the assumption is these could run in the neighborhood, with the historic district probably being more,
Right.
but say 5,000 per site, or maybe that's 7,500 and the other two are 7,500. So of that $15,000, I think you're prioritizing. If you had money to do them all, you could do them all.
Right.
But by ranking them, you'd know which one you'd start with. So that's how that would work.
I mean, I think that the way it's ranked is probably where we need to stay with it. I also think that we're going to be really busy with the theater. There's going to be a lot of meetings and public input. We're going to be having a lot of discussion. So I feel like taking our resources to something that we're not going to landmark just doesn't, much as I'd like to, I don't think we should.
Well, if we add Matilaha to the list, it doesn't go away at the end of the year. It just stays on the list and moves up as the others are dealt with. I think that's what this is getting at, basically.
I'm still concerned, I mean, the historic district, if we're talking about going from the Pacific Bell all the way down to the district, and I mean, that is a big piece of area that, I mean, even if we had to split the resource reports into two or something, it's going to take a lot of our budget to do that.
So
And
1 year full-time focus.
yeah,
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah, at least.
Exactly.
But I think my understanding is that we would add the junior high school to the list to get it in the pipeline, and to have people aware of the fact that it's an important asset, historic asset, rather than just it's already had this structure added to it this year, a pergola type thing. So it's just an awareness issue in my thoughts.
One thing that triggered it for me was that they have a proposal to demolish the kitchen, right? Cafeteria, and I know that was built in the 50s. So, but that's what triggered me to think if there's going to be a building or buildings being demolished, that we should know what we're demolishing, what we have there, and what we're demolishing. That was my thinking, but. I'm willing to concede leaving it down on the list further. I do agree that putting the historic district at the top of our list is a bigger priority now for several reasons. One is that there's been a discussion about redoing the design guidelines. There's 4 different design guide. I don't know if you want to talk about the discussion that took place at not last council meeting, but the council meeting before, about what the council decided about the guidelines.
Right. So you essentially have the 4 different design guidelines in play, that many of which overlap. So a lot of the properties downtown are subject to 2 different design guidelines, one of which, the Chevron station, is actually covered by 3 different design guidelines. So 2-3 weeks ago, we had taken this before the city council about how and when to deal with either updating, consolidating, or even expanding the design guidelines, because none really covers the western edge of Ojai Avenue, even though you have a lot from the central area going eastward. The council discussion was essentially take a short-term approach to just clean up the mapping so you don't have them subject to multiple design guidelines where it's clear which guideline would apply. We haven't done that yet. It just went to council. But I think also, as you know, we're trying to get the general plan effort going. The RFQ went out 3 weeks ago. We should be getting responses by the end of January. So we have sort of major citywide planning efforts coming in, and it becomes a question of when do you want to undertake redoing the design guidelines substantively, or say the zoning ordinance. And based on the council's discussion, I think the focus is more get the general plan going, clean up the guidelines short term, but don't do any major revisions now. So that would wait till later.
So if we proceeded with working on the historic downtown district, that would affect ultimately how the guidelines for that area looked, wouldn't it?
Oh, correct. I mean, if you had a downtown historic district, say that's in place by the time in the future you're redoing the design guidelines, that would be a key piece of how you want to handle the guidelines. Absolutely.
That's one of the main reasons I think we should move forward on it.
Darwin, Commissioner McCready?
I have to confess to being a little, my memory's a little bit shy on this. Don't we have a couple RFPs out for Historic Resources Report? Didn't we prioritize already to get an RFP for the library and the theater? Am I wrong? We have no RFPs out.
The theater, you are correct, and we had received 3 consultants had submitted on that, but it was only the theater.
So that's where we are with
Correct.
for new landmarking efforts.
Right.
I'm in agreement with McHatton. I think that the downtown plan is a huge, it's an enormous undertaking, and I feel really gun shy after the Nordhoff School thing that we went through. There are multiple property owners in the downtown district. When this first came up, when we came up in a public comment period, I think, I said, we need to establish that we have significant public buy-in before we embark on this. We can't, the Historic Preservation Commission, in my opinion, can't own this. So that's my feeling on it.
So
Commissioner
That's-
McHatton?
Thank you. That's in the January agenda, we do have talking about brochures, and one of the brochures that I wanted to put together was a historic core, and to have it just start getting it talked about and having it talked about in social media and having it just brought up at public comment and just keeping that discussion going, so it's not like something we're trying to do behind closed doors. We're trying to welcome everybody to talk about it, and you know, as we look at it, it's not going to be every building's not going to, it's as a district in itself, but within that there's going to be buildings that don't comply, and they have to want to be a part of it. I just get concerned, you know, just individually, like there's a jewelry store that has the bank that's in the original bank building, and there's new owners. And I was approached by somebody who knew I was a commissioner who was concerned that the new owners were talking about doing construction where the vault was.
Which store is this?
It's
the jewelry
Is it in the
store.
arcade?
Has the Ojai
It is.
State Bank vault in the arcade?
Jess Meharry?
no, it's the it's like
Gem Quest?
no, it's like
No.
love.
Oh, Love
Harmony.
Heals.
Wisteria
Love
Monte
Heals.
Grappa?
Love
Is that
Heals.
what it
Love
was?
Heals.
And what
Love
is the
Look,
issue?
you.
That was just sold?
It was just sold. And the tenant has a 3-year lease, but then, you know, just concerned that the new owners were, there was talk of something happening with construction, and they asked me, and I was like, I don't know, it's not a historic landmark, but it's part of the historic arcade, so I said, you know, and it's all part of having just the owners, the tenants, the residents understand how important it is that our historic core district is, when you think of Ojai, when you see, I mean, that's what you think of, is that when you come in from, especially from like the post office to the
I actually
So
have
is-
a- I'm sorry, go ahead.
So is your suggestion that the way we could lead out on this is by just doing our own sort of list making to begin with, and short narratives on the important buildings and what we see as the potential district, and just putting it out as information. I can see that.
It has to start someplace.
It has to start someplace. I think that's a good point.
My
Good place to
comment on the
start.
downtown, I mean, lately, the last 2 years, there's so much going on down there, and I'm seeing changes that don't necessarily go with the town. You know, this is our value. This is our core value, is the arcade and the downtown look and the integrity of Ojai. Not creating a historic district and being, you know, gun shy of having the public, whoever they are. I mean, and I say that in a way that somebody moves to town, they buy a building, they change it the way they feel they want it to be, they sell it, and they go to Camarillo or Palm Springs or Seattle. You know, I mean, it's not a home investment in a way. So when I say the public, I say it with irony. I think there needs to be a very strict historic district and strict guidelines to keep the integrity of Ojai and the sensibility of the town in the style of Edward Libby, which is beautiful places make people behave better, and that's why he got behind build. That's what, you know, that was the theory.
I don't disagree. I just don't want to be naive. I mean, I saw what we went through over Taormina. It was pretty wrenching, and that's just a little residential neighborhood. So
It's all going to be that way.
Yeah.
It just will be that way.
well, I just want us to be
Yeah.
aware.
Yeah, we are. We're scared, but we're going to do it.
I think we should put some money behind it, though, too. Get this council to get behind it and start getting some reports, because I'd hate to see our budget wasted for another year and not produce something more.
Can I jump in here? So, sorry for being late, but I left Redondo Beach to talk about the item number 3. Arrived late because there was accident on PCH. With a new phrase I have is, the later you are when it comes to traffic. So again, going back, since the action item really is on number 3 is Matilaha Junior High School, and we're now outside that action item on discussing an item that's not on our agenda, I think we're straying. And Mr. Vega could confirm that or not, or Mr. Connolly. But it seems like we're heading off into actions that we'd like to take that's not part of a discussion, that's not on our agenda.
Well, I don't agree with that, actually. I think
Well,
if we're
before we start talking about other things that aren't on the agenda, can we just finish up with Matilaha Junior High School, since
Can I
that is
ask
on?
Something?
Can I?
Oh, go ahead.
I just drove 2 hours to get here to this meeting. I'm sorry. And came home early from watching a 5.5-month-old grandson. So Matilaha Junior High School, again, it is a part of school. I talked to Craig Walker yesterday. I talked to Andrew Cantwell yesterday to make him aware of that this was on our agenda, so that he wouldn't freak out. He's okay, so he understands what we're doing and why we're doing it. I talked to Luke Connolly this morning. I talked to Elise this morning. I called back and left a message for Andy Cantwell. He's involved in negotiations all day today, and left a message then for Luke Connolly. So again, the building so I confirmed with him that there is a cafeteria building that's on there, as Commissioner DuPoint mentioned, and Craig pointed out, and Andy pointed out, that was built about 1954. It's been used somewhat since then, but again, they're adding a 3rd grade. So as Andy described it, it is a building that serves 50, and they're going to need to serve 200. It's not a part of the original building. I did a Google Earth view at the time. You can see that it kind of looks like it got plopped down in the middle of the playground in 1954. Not a part of that. Also, them being a school district, they have and again, talking to Community Development Director Connolly, they can pretty much do whatever they want to do with a building on the school as long as it's continuing to do something to do at the school. As Luke pointed out, if they go in and tear down that building, they can tear it down, they can rebuild it. They don't come to the city for a permit, they go up the chain with the school district. So it's little that we can do. However, I caveat that comment with the fact that if they were touching the original Nordhoff High School, the original buildings that go back to 1912, 1914, Elise would know better the exact dates, then yeah, we would certainly be involved because of their historic essence. So, you know, I'm happy. And again, talking with Commissioner DuPoit today, part of the reason we started getting the historical resources report on the Nordhoff Grammar School was the fact that we wanted to get information on what was historic. So somebody came to us and said, hey, you know, is this historic? Yes. Why? So we could actually explain that. And so I think that's pretty much the idea that Elise has in mind, that, you know, it just would be nice to know what is historic on the Matilaha School at some point. What priority it's given is certainly up to the Historic Preservation Commission. As far as budgets go, I'm of the opinion that we have $5,000 in the current city budget. That $5,000 is for the Historic Resources Report on the theater, and that the 3 items that we identified as our priorities or for future years. Things I've learned since then, again, the number one on that is the Boyd Center. That got some attention because of the Park and Rec layout that they've done, which shows the Boyd Center as a dashed line rather than a hard line in an existing building. There have been reassurances from the park person and from Mayor Johnson, who's just been reelected, so I'm sure he's sticking with that the Boyd Center will continue. To me, that was a lower priority because of that, but the HBC felt like we needed to get a historic resource report. The library in the city is actually owned by the county. So at some point when we, you know, again, talk about what our priorities in preparation for our request to the City Council for their 2019-2020 budget, I think that's a time when we want to once again maybe look at the 3 items we've put on there and whether the Matilaha High School fits in on that. So, thank you.
Commissioner McCatton?
Probably a naive question, but if there's a property that, as long as Matilaha Junior High School operates as a school, like you said, they could do what they want. So to do a full report on it and spend all that money just to know, it would be great if we had that kind of money, you know, just to do that. But since we're trying to look at landmark status of buildings, is there a light version?
Light report? Report light?
A light historic resources.
Is there
I
something
actually
to
have a comment about that. Based on your
Getting the light.
discussion and what we've had here, I think adding Matilaha to the list is a great idea, just to get it on there so it's a conversation, because it is an important building. I think doing a report on it is really important. Even if it is under the school jurisdiction, they can knock it down with a wrecking ball, they can do whatever they want, but they need to know what's there, and that will inform their decisions. And to me, that is a huge priority. It's not necessarily top of the list. There are, you know, downtown, the library, et cetera, but with Chaparral, the old Nordhoff, they knew what was going on, and that was informative to all of the people who came forward on that. So they need to know what's there. So, you know, I don't know that this is an action item, but I believe adding Matilaha to the priority list, whatever number it falls, maybe number 4 at this point, and it can move up as time goes by.
Does anybody have any objection to having it on the list?
No, not at all.
How do we move forward? Do we make a motion to add it, since it's just a discussion item?
Doesn't, she said not to put it on the top of the list. But
Just put it on the list.
Right. Well, certainly, if that seems to be the consensus, is add it to the list. And essentially, the list probably wouldn't matter how long it is. You have a certain budget, as long as you prioritize what you want to do next. That's, I think, more important. If you had 5 or 10 things on the list, it wouldn't really matter. Yeah, I don't know, since it is a discussion item, I'm fine with you're not really approving anything. This isn't a permit, so your discussion resulted in adding this to the list, and it sounds like creating it as a 4th item instead of a 1st item. What it sounds like to me.
So, are you saying that you don't think the Boyd should be number 1, that the library and the Boyd should switch?
Well,
And that,
I'm just sharing what my opinion was then. I don't really think we need to talk about the priorities,
I'm just wondering if it
resetting the
should-
priorities
should be
until we do them like in February
okay.
for the
I'm
next
just-
budget.
I'm
Yeah,
just thinking for a
I'm
future
just, I was
agenda.
just giving you some background on how we got to the 1, 2, 3.
But for
Okay.
tonight's discussion item, we agree to add Matilaha to the list for future historic preservation discussions.
Is it appropriate to ask how much our budget was for this year and what was spent on it so far?
So, yeah, so again, having been to every budget meeting there was that I could go to, again, because of the request we have from the museum, and because I'm a budget kind of guy professionally. Again, I think it came down to $5,000 was in this year's budget. The amount, well, Commissioner DePoit, you had to have been there on every one of those meetings. So basically what happens is in any budget, everybody puts in their wish list. It comes down to what amount is left. We're kind of down on the lower end of the scale behind staffing and police and streets, and so we're kind of down there at the end. So, and really our only request was, at that time, was $5,000 for the theater. So prior to that, as you mentioned, we had put in a request for this building and for Nordhoff Grammar School at the same time. And I think we had $10,000 or $15,000 that was allocated, and we actually ended up spending a little bit more than was allocated because we had to do some follow-ups, some follow-up reporting.
For both of those buildings?
I
A little more
believe
than
so.
15 grand for both.
I think it was somewhere in the $12,000 to $15,000 range.
Big.
Yeah.
Didn't you also have to pay for the artist for the gate? Was that part of the budget?
No, the money for the gate is a completely separate budget. That's actually being taken care out of the Arts Commission budget. And while you mentioned that, Mark, was Mark here earlier? Oh, good. Thank you, Elise. Okay, there we go. So the gate comes out of the Art Commission budget.
So we are moving on to discussion item number 4.
I just wanted to add one thing to check is the information I had, and Brian's probably on it more. I thought there was $15,000 for fiscal year 18-19 for reports instead of 5. I think it's 15.
Is it 15?
I believe it's 15. That was why I think the assumption was it could cover the 3 priorities because 5,000 would not do.
Mr. Connolly, can we have a definitive number for our next meeting?
You absolutely will, but I believe.
Oh, okay, well, there you go. We
Do you
a
have the budget
definitive
up,
number.
Sherry?
Yeah, we reported in March and gave it to you that the commission gets 23,000, and then we gave them a breakdown that McCready took to the council and got it approved. And 15,000 was for the contract services for doing reports.
And we may have the definitive answer. I've got the same sheet of paper, but one thing that's troubling me, I can see the request is I don't have an absolute date that this is what the council acted on.
Okay.
But I had assumed that because you had 3 priority items that the budget was estimated to cover those 3. If it's only 5,000, that means you may only be able to do 1.
Well, and
2 at the
again,
most.
that 5 was to cover the theater,
Right.
which is currently ongoing, I thought. So James is checking the budget. So as I reported to Commissioner DePoit, I will talk to Rudy Livingston, the finance manager for the city, and get our budget and also how much has been spent and report that
Yeah,
to the
we'll
next meeting.
definitely have it current for the next meeting.
Aren't there other items on the budget like education?
Yes, that's what I was going to say. There are other things in the budget like the USC seminars and plaques, materials. So there are other things in the budget. I would be surprised if, Okay,
All right.
thanks.
So I think we do need to decide to use that money
Yeah.
for one of,
Um,
to start the downtown district or something.
Can we each have a copy of the budget in January
Yeah,
for
that would be-
2019? In our packets, is that a possibility?
Which-
Oh, I know, but, yeah, if you could, if you don't mind.
You want
that
to add a
would be
copy of
great.
the city budget?
No, our historic preservation
was gonna
budget.
say.
I don't want to know about insurance.
I think
just
I'm the only
want-
person that's interested in that. So
Yeah.
yes, no,
Just
I
the
agree.
3 or
So,
4 things on there, and we can have it in our packet. Thank
Yeah.
you, Sherry.
and I'll get an update from Rudy on
It's
what's been
okay.
spent so
You
far.
don't have to.
Be nice
I'll
to
print it
see.
out and bring it.
So, Brian?
Yes.
Just to make it clear, so if we spent 5, that means we have 10 left, and then we have until March to spend it?
We have until June 30th to
Right.
spend it. The budgets are, their fiscal year is July 1st through June 30th.
Thank you.
And actually, it's more of a committed amount rather than a spent amount, so
Okay.
No, that's
If we
correct.
don't spend all of it, does it go forward?
it does not. Otherwise, we'd be rich.
Okay, we are way,
Because we haven't
way
spent
off
our
topic.
education budget.
We are
Yes.
off topic like a
Okay.
really long way. So let's get back, and Matilla has added to the priority list. Moving on to discussion item number 4, staff report.
Again, this is fairly self-explanatory in terms of getting the presentation for the plaques for those who have served, Rose Boggs for 30 years of service and Terrence Hill for 25 years of service to the city council. And I'm going to correct myself, I wasn't sure if the Terrence Hill had gone. Had not.
Left council?
Okay, it's still there. So, correct, okay. So again, if the recommendation to have a formal presentation and acknowledgement to the city council for their years of service.
Any comments, commissioner comments?
I think it's a great idea.
I
I
think it's
second
great.
that if it's a motion.
It's not. Actually, question, where does Pat Clark Dorner fit in all this?
Good question.
I think of David, Terry, Pat, Rose as being like key folks that have carried that. So I didn't know, yes.
She already received one. It's just these 2 people are the ones that haven't received one yet.
Okay.
But all the people before have.
Okay, so Pat received one. Thank you very much, Sherry. Great. Just wanted to make sure everybody was covered.
Yeah.
He just retired.
So
And Terry received the lifetime, I'm sorry.
the lifetime is different from this?
It is.
Yes.
That was for just 1 year's.
Right.
The commission, this is for a plaque for serving on the commission.
And so this discussion item is in front of us because it's not official that commissioners
We've
get
done it
this.
in the past.
It's been
Staff
done,
has
but it's
been
not
doing it,
official.
But it got brought up to us. Who told you to do it?
Okay,
So
so,
we just thought we could get a
Yeah.
formal.
Do we vote?
From the HPC to ask the
Okay.
council. And if you'll note in the subject line, it says 10 years or more.
mhm.
Yes.
But that would be your decision. Do you want, nobody gets a plaque unless they've served 25 or 30 or something like. But typically in the past, and you can even see, we have
Mhm.
plaques on the wall that are 10 years or more
Yeah.
typically, because that's a pretty good
I think 10's pretty good.
life to a commission.
Yeah.
Well, I'll make a motion.
Formalize, yes.
I'll make a motion that we request staff to ask city council to consider presenting appreciation plaques to Rose Boggs and Terrence Hill.
I'll
And
second
how
that.
about,
And-
not just them, but what I'm saying, could you recommend, or what staff was.
Any
asking,
commissioner who serves 10 years or
served
more.
over 10 years, would you be supportive of the city providing them with a appreciation plaque?
Okay, that's better.
Can you make that
If
motion?
not, that's
that-
okay too.
Amend your motion.
That we ask staff to request the city to provide plaques of appreciation to commissioners who have served 10 years or more.
And I'll second that.
Okay, so discussion, question, James? Do you know what the other commissions are doing?
Regarding,
We're in the middle of a motion.
10-year
Do you wanna
recognition.
do
No,
the
no,
discussion?
you have a motion, you have a second, and then you have discussion.
I thought we had discussion and motion. in a
No,
second.
no,
Okay,
no.
sorry.
You did motion a second, then discussion. That's what I was,
Learn
that's why I
something
said
every day.
discussion.
Okay, sorry.
And so my question was just
Got
to
it.
James, just to find out what the other commissions are doing, whether, I mean, I agree with it completely, and just,
Yeah, I agree with that. I want to hear it too.
So I didn't hear the specific question, so maybe that's.
so the question is, we have the 10-year,
Mhm.
that's kind of been the threshold
Right.
as shown up there. Are the other commissioners commissions giving plaques to commissioners that have served longer than 10 years?
Yes, we're currently working on one for the planning commission. One of the commissioners there that served for quite a while, so there are plaques available. What we can do is we have a policy. There's a city policy on it. I can get that policy and provide it to the committee for discussion. I don't remember off the top of my head what the yearly awards are per each year. So.
Okay, well, we're not breaking a mold. We're following along. So I believe we have a motion to vote on. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next is future agenda items. December 14th, Commission Appreciation Dinner. We know about that. And January 10th, Thursday, we are going to talk a little bit more about budgeting, I think, and some of the priority discussions we had tonight. Ryan?
So where are we looking now?
Future agenda.
Future agenda items.
Yeah, there you go.
So, yeah, I'd like to just a couple comments. One is the HBC terms have been essentially completed. And so they will be before us as a consideration, courtesy copy to us to review. Currently, with all of the great work and support that Elise has done, you'll see a red line copy, so you'll be able to see where the changes were. Again, that is planned to come to us at the HBC meeting in January. And then after we have seen it, then it will go to a council meeting. And if we have disagreements with what was done by the HBC terms, the ad hoc committee, then it would be for us to go to the city council meeting and raise those objections that way. Okay? So, Sherry, if we can make sure the HPC terms and Luke is in the agenda for January's meeting. And Luke and I talked today, and so Luke and I will be meeting to kind of set the agenda for the next meetings prior to the meeting.
Okay.
The other thing is that I think for future items, and this goes back to something that Commissioner DePoit and I discussed today, and we've discussed here, is to talk about forming an ad hoc committee to figure out what a historic district actually means. Because again, Luke and I were talking about that, and he, because of his experience, there's so many different definitions on what it actually means. Are we freezing things in time, or?
Well, that's one of, my questions coming to a community. I've seen it both ways, and I think that's something hopefully would be on our January 10th item, is a discussion about adaptive reuse, which ties right into historic preservation. How does the community view preservation? Is it we want to keep things intact and essentially minimize change and preserve, or are you trying to set things up so buildings can adapt and be used but maintaining their character? And while they're similar, they're not identical.
There is someone in Ojai. I believe he'll be here in January. They usually come just before Christmas and stay for 60 days. It's Bill Hart. He was the chairman of the Council of the National Trust for Historic Preservation for many years, president of the University in Rome. He's done a lot of preservation. He lives in D.C. He's incredibly knowledgeable. I can ask him if he might come and speak to us on the subject. He's probably the definitive voice within
No,
Would be
that's
really
Circle.
good. I'd like that.
yeah, that sounds great. But it's also for me too. Is like each community has its different view, and I know the time I've been here, Ojai has people have very strong feelings about what Ojai is.
I think he can talk about adaptive reuse in general, how other communities have dealt with it, Main Street projects, Main Street projects across the country, and how the National Trust has worked on that for each community. And, he's an interesting guy, so I'll see if he's available, and I'll let you know.
And that would be good because the discussion I'm thinking is just starting very generally with what are, incentives that you are, parking reductions, things like that, if you're trying to get buildings reused. And I'm not sure Ojai has a lot of the issues other communities have where they literally can't get people to go into the buildings.
No, we don't have that.
And it also seems, just my limited observation so far, is a lot of adaptive reuse in bigger cities is focused on taking older commercial industrial buildings, making them sort of live, work, or loft space, which also seems to be less of an issue here, where a lot of the reuse, for good or bad, things like Topa Topa Brewery come up, where that's essentially an adaptive reuse, has nothing to do with residential. And I don't want to segue onto that because I know there's some feelings about that property.
Bill Hart can speak to what historic preservation is in modern terms, and how other communities are.
No, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, he's the right guy, so I'll see.
I do. Through Facebook, I've been trying to research as many cities and communities as I can to see how they all do it and how they all have their social media presence. And a lot of them have historic cores. And the one thing that is, there's no one thing. Every community does it a different way. So just have to find out what's best for Ojai and get the community to get behind it.
Further agenda items? Anything? So we'll see them in January? Okay, great. Thanks, Sherry.
And can I bring the one on the historic, like just the kind of framework of the historic core? Okay, great.
Thank you, Sherry.
Anything? Nothing?
What is scheduled for the city council meeting to discuss one of the proposals for the contract? Is that something that we vote on at a council meeting?
Yeah, we would be bringing it forward with a recommendation.
Do you think that's going to be done in January?
I would expect January. I don't know if it'll be the 8th, but it'll be in January.
Is it possible for you to describe the 3 different proposals, or is that not?
Oh, no, I can. I haven't committed them all to memory. I've looked through them. The prices are ranging quite a bit from almost $4,000 to over $13,000. So what I would like to do too is to touch base with some of them and make sure they're looking at the same scope of work, because very often some people have a lot more in depth than somebody else. So I don't want to go just by cost. If we have a $5,000 budget issue, that could almost settle it. All appear to be qualified, so that was not the issue. But again, I don't know if, like, the high bidder seemed to have some things in there that might not be necessary, which could get their price down. And there could be trade-offs then in terms of just, if the price is then closer, it might be worth actually interviewing people and seeing who's most on point for that. I don't know what the city's typical protocol is where you get that, but very often it can be helpful if everybody, say, is within budget, to sit down and meet them and see who might be the best suited. And then that could be part of the staff report to council in terms of not only what the budget was, but strengths and weaknesses of the firm.
So you would give your recommendation to the council? Is that how it works? Or?
I haven't done it in this city, but that's typically how it would work, yes.
Any other comments? Agenda items?
Just
Nothing?
one other question. James, did you find the line item in the budget?
I can answer that quickly. So I think the confusion is, and we will confirm this and send out an email, but I think the request from the committee was for $15,000, but what was granted was $5,000.
Okay.
Which is why we prioritized the one, first priority item. But we'll confirm that between now and the next meeting. And send it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, last call. Meeting's adjourned.
Wait, I have
Oops.
one more. Commissioner Akins, will you update the committee on the installation of the grammar school plaque? What's going on with that, please?
Okay, so as you know, we redid the plaque. It was given to Andy Cantwell, Superintendent Cantwell, very early in September, day before school started, I think. So Elise was asking me about that. I'd been giving them a little time, and little time had long passed. And so I talked to Superintendent Cantwell. He happened to have his director of facilities in his office at that very moment. He said, let me ask. And so he turned and asked that person. That person said basically it had fallen off their radar is the term they used. So I asked them if they could follow through on it, and if they would also let me know, just so I could pop out and take pictures when they install the plaque. So I'm waiting for that. And that I talked to him 3-4 weeks ago. So thank you, Elise.
Any other comments? Meeting's adjourned.
Okay. Oh, well, we're missing Thais, so.
Yeah, we're missing Thais. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Did it get approved? Yeah, we're missing Thais. She's in New Zealand, so she couldn't drive back.
Yeah, let me, if you guys don't mind if I can get a picture, because I don't think we've gotten one for a while.
Smile, bro.
Not how he's planned to dress, but. Would you like us to sit or stand?
Oh, sitting is better. I don't want to